Hello everyone, and welcome to our first seminar being organized by the Working Group for Women in Astronomy of the International Astronomical Union. And we are very happy to start off our term with this is the first event that we're going to have. And this would be a webinar made up of 3 talks. So we'll start off with Mamta, who is the new chair for our International Astronomical Union Women in Astronomy Working Group. This will be followed by a talk by Deborah, who's the president of the International Astronomical Union. And then we have a talk by Santiago, who is also part of the working group of the Women in Astronomy. So let me introduce Mamta to all of you. Mamta is the new chair of the International Astronomical Union Women in Astronomy Working Group. And she has been leading the Society for Women Researchers at the University Claude Bernard, Lyon in France, the SFC-UDI, and has been teaching under fixed-term professor position as well as CNRS fixed-term researcher positions. Her main research interest is cluster of galaxies and the commissioning of low-frequency radio telescopes like LOFAR and NENUFAR. She's a fellow of the Société Française d'Astronomie and Astrophysics, that is the SF2A, pardon me for my pronunciations, the Astronomical Society of India, the Standing Committee for Gender Equity in Sciences, the SGCS. In 2019, she was appointed as the representative for women in STEM by the University Claude Bernard, Lyon 1, for her service to women in STEM. So welcome Mamta, and we'll start off with talk by Mamta. Looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Priya. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all today, especially the speakers, the co-chairs, and all of you to this virtual IAU Women in Astronomy seminar series. We are happy to see the interest and the response of the IAU members and the non-members towards the activities of this working group. We have got lots of interesting response, and you can follow all the activities and the response of the members on our website, which we had recently launched, on our Slack channel, and you can also follow us on our newsletters that we will be circulating regularly. So what is this IAU Women in Astronomy Working Group? So back in 2003, for the 25th General Assembly meeting of IAU in Sydney, the IAU recognized and supported the needs and endeavors of women astronomers through the establishment of executive. Okay, all right, so we had a little music in the middle, but doesn't matter. So yeah, so that's what it is. Its mandate is to collect information from women astronomers all over the world, support actions basically to support their careers and to achieve equality. Okay.
So I've muted all. Mamta, you need to unmute yourself. Mamta, please unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
Right. So sorry. Okay, that's that is the okay, so maybe we will have to remove certain participants because there is some disturbance going on. Okay, right. So what we want to do in the next 3 years is focus on the difficulties that women astronomers face in their career and help bridge the gender gap in astronomy and create awareness. And to achieve all this, we look forward to working with all the working group members, the organizing committee members, and the various officers of the IAU. So with this, I will start my presentation for today, which is on career challenges faced by women in astronomy. So let me just share my screen, right? So there we are. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah, all right. So to start with, I'm a French national I'm a low frequency radio astronomer working on fixed term contracts on SK and Pathfinder related projects in France since 14 years. And that's the kind of the activities that I've been doing right from my PhD days. So since last 19 years, with 14 years in France, I'm working on galaxy clusters and agents. I've been mostly doing imaging at low frequency, which is a very difficult task because we have lots of RFIs at low frequencies, which contaminates the data. So it's very tricky to get the best the morphological structures out of the image at very low frequencies. So you can see some images from the GMRT, from the low-FAR VLBI, and also from the NENUFAR, which is an SK pathfinder. I've been also involved in instrument commissioning, so looking and validating the data at very low frequencies and the pipeline and making sense of the new data which is coming in and what are the calibration and data analysis checks that we have to do to make sure that the data that is there can be used for science. I've been also teaching and leading international exchange programs and between India and France. And I've been training students, so I've trained at least 17 graduate, master, PhD, postdocs, students, and I have organized 14 international schools and conference, especially the EWASs, which is now known as EAS, the Franco-Indian meetings, and now with IAU, we will be organizing many new ones. I'm also working towards the Square Kilometer, which is upcoming radio telescope, which will be operating at very low up to very high frequencies with lots of interesting science that will be done at radio wavelengths. And I'm leading at least 3 projects on galaxy clusters and agents with the SK, a part of the executive committee, at least of India, and science working group committee of the SK International. And I'm also SK Regional Center Steering Committee member. So we are basically looking at the science case sent by all the users from all over the world, looking at the system requirements and providing this input to the data management team of the SK. Besides that, I've been involved into outreach, and very lately I realized that there are less women in astronomy and in STEM topics, so we need to help them. And so I support women career and research, and I try to do activities related to that. So women are underrepresented in STEM, and the reasons are, of course, the training, the support, and the training, the support and encouragement, etc., that we are giving to them. So why are women less in astronomy? Let's try to understand. There's a higher gender gap. Of course, in pure science fields, the situation is not different in astronomy, with only 20% women in permanent positions. And the key factors which are feeding this kind of gender gap is basically gender stereotypes. At early age, girls are kind of not encouraged to enter into STEM. And when they even enter into STEM, they find it's mostly male-dominated field with very less women, less flexibility, and higher competition. And there are also lack of role models at every level, from PhD to postdoc to permanent and to professor level. So we are lacking role models. And there is also a lack of analysis, encouragement, and support. The way their work is analyzed is also not always very encouraging. They may land up even with women mentors, but those women mentors, since they have been in this challenging situation and performing in the male-dominated field, they land up. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you well. All's good.
Okay, all right. So yeah, so they land up being discouraged, or they land up being, they usually they are graded harder and they are advised to work harder. But when it comes to getting the permanent position, somehow they also don't get enough support. So I like this particular quote from Nancy Grace Brown, who was the mother of the Hubble telescope. And she says that, I still remember asking my high school guidance teacher to take a second year of algebra instead of a 5th year of Latin. She looked down her nose at me and sneered, what lady would take mathematics instead of Latin? So that's how the society pressure or the encouragement plays a role. And she turned out to be one of the first women executive at NASA. So we shouldn't really get discouraged, as to say. So what's happening on the French side? On the French side, we can see the French Ministry of Higher Education is supporting women career in higher academics. So that's great. And how do they do that? They create awareness every year. They are publishing these kind of statistics where they show the number of engineering students and research students. And you can see from 2000 to 2019, women were just 22 to 28% in engineering, and it was dominated mostly by male students from 78 to 72%. And in research as well, you can see that women were 46% at the inscription first year, and in the last year when they finished their course, there were 42 or 44% women, and there were 54 or 56% men. So in research, the situation is slightly better than in engineering, but still it is less. And the reason is, of course, lack of awareness, training, family situations, society practices, etc. So now let's go more deep inside and see who are these researchers. So these research students are actually students from all fields of science: mathematics, engineering, technology, physics, chemistry, social science, biology, medical science, human science. So everything is there. And you can see that especially in maths, engineering, technology, and physics, the percentage of women is 15%, 16%, 21%. And when you go towards social science, medical science, biological science, or midwife and nurse studies, etc., you can see that women percentage starts to go up and men percentage goes down. So why is this imbalance in those pure science topics? There is, of course, lack of awareness, family situation, social practice, professional support, etc. So they again published this result where they show that actually when it comes to enrollment in higher education, higher academic courses, women are outnumbering men. There are more women than men. From the age group of 26 to 34 and 32 to 44. There are always more women, and from 2006 to 2016, the number of women enrolled in higher degrees is actually growing. So that's a good sign. At least it shows that society is encouraging women to get into higher degree, but and higher academic courses. And men are also there, but somehow they land up having this responsibility over them to provide stability and to have a stable career. So they give up higher education, or they give up long professional courses where you need many years to obtain a degree and then a job. And they get into really hard jobs where they can start to earn livelihood for the family and play the responsible role as the society expects from them. But what happens is that even if those women, they are higher in number for higher academic courses, or even if they finish their position as a student, and even when they get their degrees, when it comes to getting jobs, their percentage drastically goes down and that of men goes up. So you can see this STEM scissor, and it exists in all of those STEM fields. So the career of women goes down dramatically for permanent positions, and there has to be a reason why. So if you go further, you will see that those women who were here, who were in a big number, they are actually still there in the system, but they'll end up always having fixed term contracts, and very few of them are being supported for permanent positions. So this was the situation in was a situation in 2014 to 2019, where there are more women holding fixed term positions, or holding as a researcher or as a support staff, doing outreach, doing communication, doing technical jobs, but not as mainstream researchers. Whereas in fixed term position, men are less compared to women, and in support staff also, men are less compared to women. And the percentage of women in research goes down from 10% at every level to just 1% at professor level. So at higher level, you will see that there are less and less women. So women are mostly holding fixed term jobs, and the reason is lack of awareness, again, family responsibilities, society practice, and professional support, which is not provided. So there was this survey conducted by French astronomers from the SF2A, and it is published in Nature from Ban et al. And they asked, do you believe that having children can create an obstacle in your career? And female and male researchers, they responded to this survey, and female researchers, many, they said, yes, certainly. They also said most likely. And few of them, they also said, so these are negative response. They said, not really or not at all. Whereas it was very inverse to men, their response. What they said was having children will not affect their career, not most likely, and not at all was mostly the answer, or some prefer not to give any answer. So we need more understanding towards this situation, and we need actions towards this to support the career of women whose career gets impacted because they prefer to have children, and they prefer to also take care of the children. So we carried out with the University of Lyon Society of Women Researchers Cell a survey, and we asked a question, if having children, to support this result of if having children can be an obstacle in your career. And what we saw is that in that survey, 67% people did not participate, 33% people participated in the survey, And among those people who participated, most of them were women, only 18% were men. The women are shown here as permanent researchers or non-permanent researchers. Then we extended this survey not only to our university and to a Franco-Indian meeting that we had organized during 11th of February and 8th of March this year in 2021. We extended it also to an IAU CAP conference that was organized in the beginning of this year. And again, we got to similar kind of results. Mostly female permanent and non-permanent researchers, they replied, and very few male permanent researchers replied, but they were more than what we had before. So what does it show? That women permanent researchers participate significantly because they're concerned about their career growth. Non-permanent women researchers, they also participate because they are still not stable in their career. Men permanent researchers participation was less, but they did participate, but it was less. And non-permanent men researchers, they did not participate at all. So why are they missing in this survey? Because perhaps they are not there. Okay, then we go further and we see the gender-wise distribution of the participants. And what we see is, this is female permanent researchers, senior, junior. This is engineering staff. This is science communication. And then this is female non-permanent researcher, senior, junior, and science communication team. And these are all male, men researcher who are senior researchers, junior researchers, and science communication. And what we can see is that at different career stage, most of the women are participated in the survey. They were either junior researchers or senior researchers, permanent or non-permanent. There were less male who participated. So more younger female permanent junior researchers participated because they're concerned about their career growth. Non-permanent researchers participated because also they are concerned about their career situation. And male permanent researchers participated in this survey because they start to show some kind of consideration. And that's because university is now imposing to start to have gender balance. And so they are perhaps the ones who are supposed to be taking action. So they want to get aware of what's happening. Right. So now if we look further, what we can see that the gender-wise years spent under fixed-term positions, under non-permanent positions by these male and female researchers. And what we find that female researchers end up spending many years, 16 years, 15 years, 17 years in fixed-term contracts, non-permanent contracts, whereas male researchers, they may end up spending 8 years. If they are a researcher, or in engineering or in communication, it was 16 because there was no permanent position for communication profile. And so women end up spending more years under fixed-term position compared to men in research. All right, we go further, and what we see, what is the reason why they spend so many years under fixed-term contracts? It's because they are the ones who are having children. So because of maternity break, they get a break also in their career, and they are encouraged to take up part-time positions, and they are not given support or offer permanent positions so easily. But women researchers who don't have children, they show a career break of 1 year or maybe less than 1 year, like men researchers. But others who are having 5 years, 7 years, 15 years career break are the ones who have children. So women researchers have longer career breaks due to maternity. If you go further, you can see more the children you have, more longer the career break is. And that's the way it goes. And if you don't have children, you don't have career break. So is there a lack of consideration or understanding for the situation of mothers? Because there are long career breaks, which is leading to biases. And because of those biases, the hiring committee or the funding committee are not really taking a good note of what's happening to these applicants who are applying and under what conditions they are working exactly. So difficulty for non-permanent mother researchers because they also don't get jobs within their country or even in other countries because of family constraints. So if you look further, you can see that gender-wise maximum hiring age, at which age they were hired, what was the maximum age. So mothers were hired at the age of 38 as a researcher, or in engineering at the age of 44, or at the age of 28 or 30 when they go into engineering or communication, and in non-permanent position, it's the same. It can go up to 56 years and they never get a permanent position. And if they are not having children responsibility, then it can be 35 years So, and men, they get hired at 33, 34, 35 because they don't wait long to into this field, because they have to pick up job as soon as possible and get stable with their career and provide a stable support to their families as per the society pressure. So in research, mothers in research got permanent jobs at the age of 38 or above. And if they accept technical or communication jobs, then it can be 30 years. And non-permanent mother researchers have been struggling even up to age of 56 to get permanent jobs in research. And these are all astronomers. So let's try to understand this whole statistics that we've been seeing in this graph. So it's a bit complicated, so let's start. So this is the phase of PhD. At the PhD phase, you have male and female researchers, and their graph starts almost in a similar fashion. So that is to say they're all equally productive and interested in their work. But male researchers, so this is an ideal graph. For them, their career goes on smoothly if they spend their time and productivity is normal. And they'll end up having permanent position as junior researchers by the age of 35, 36. Female researchers who don't have children responsibility, their graph is also similar to that of male researchers, with some shift, because they encounter a lot of social mindsets, stereotypes, biases, etc., which puts them down. But again, these are just 10% of female researchers. 90% of female researchers who are at the age of 28 to 35 land up having children. And when they have children, they get career breaks. When they get career breaks, they are not supported enough because there are not enough funds. And when there are not enough funds, they'll end up picking up part-time jobs. And part-time jobs also produces part-time, or the productivity goes down. They're based upon the funding, available funding, and the job and the productivity and the time they can put in. So all this causes a flatness in their productivity. So these are the tasks in research: teaching, meetings, service to the community, publications, etc., everything added. So this is how their graph, it becomes flat when they start to have children or maternity phase. And even if they are given some support, even if not funding, but just some support to continue with their research, they can start to pick up, they can start to perform. So these data points are real points coming from one of the researchers' profile, and these are the ideal situation. So if they land up teaching, which can also help them to have some funding to support their career, or if they are organizing meetings and meeting new possible collaborators and having some job possibilities, or if they're doing some kind of service to the community in the form of outreach activities, which can be paid, which is what they'll end up taking in order to support their financial situation, their productivity can slowly start to go up. But that's the situation. And this is the situation when they are reaching a junior researcher position level. It's usually flat. The ones who don't opt to have children before they get a permanent position, they'll end up being in this kind of depression or non-productive phase when they prefer to, or when they decide to have children later on. But the difference is, at least here they have a permanent position and their progress will go down because of that, but still they have a permanent position, but here they don't have. So they have to struggle more here and spend time in writing applications. Right. So there are small factors here. There are larger factors here, which is affecting their productivity. But the hiring committee, at least the CNRS Researchers Application Guide, says that we only look for excellent candidates. And who are excellent candidates? The ones who have high publication, high international visibility, who are leading research topics, managing contracts, supervising students, doing outreach, traveling, etc. So all these are the elements which are needed to become an excellent candidate. But one has to remember that these female researchers who have children responsibility, they were not given funds just after their maternity break to continue with their career. They had to look for funding and their productivity has gone down. So how can we evaluate their proposal into excellent candidates is a question which one should ask. Right? So there are different factors. These are female researchers with no children responsibility, with children responsibility, the factors are bigger. And if there are also female researchers with colored skin, they also end up having problems, especially discrimination due to their origin. So their problem gets more bigger. So there are biases, there are discrimination, there are no funding provided, specific funding provided just after maternity to support their career, and there's a lack of local support. So during this phase, Yeah, during this phase, they go through a big imposter syndrome where they think what they know is very small and what others know is quite large, and they don't deserve to be there. But the reality is everyone has his own expertise and skills, and everyone's skills are different. And the reality is this. And so they should just trust on people who encourage and who invite them. And when they achieve, then they should trust on themselves that they have achieved because they deserved it. So there is, what is the reason? Why is this decrease happening? That's because of this famous leaky pipeline effect in STEM, which exists. We already saw the STEM scissor graph, and this is how it is. After their PhD, when they are enrolled into PhD, they are 55% men, 45% women, as we saw earlier. But as soon as they finish their PhD, many of them are just leaking. They're just going out of the system because they don't have support, because they start to have children, and it's difficult to maintain the career. And there is no local support even provided from their institutes, for example. But institutions at the universities are encouraging or enrolling students equally, but they also get good enrollment fees. And they also get good recognition for practicing gender balance. So that's good. But somehow there's no support provided by the university once these women start to have children. So mothers are facing more bias compared to other applicants who are here. And that goes on during the postdoc level. And every 2 or 3 years, you will see women are just stopping research because they have to pick up the career because they're not getting enough funds, enough support, enough encouragement. And so the percentage can easily change from 75% men to 25% women, with very few women left at the 15 years after their PhD continuing to do their research. But those are the women who have been earning funding based upon writing funding proposals and having their jobs based upon their own caliber that they managed to get funds and support their career. Once they enter into permanent position, again, you can see 80% men and 20% women, and this is the situation. And again, women are going out. These are again who are not in permanent position. So we lose them in spite of they trying hard for 20 years to be in this field. And finally, at senior position level, you will find only 5% female at professor level or director level, and 95% are men. So that's this STEM pipeline, which is not really very encouraging, and that's how it is. Right. So we need to find a way to support these female candidates who are skilled, but who don't manage because they don't get enough support. How do you do that? So all these factors, discrimination, stereotype, bias, and neglect for women expertise, this is all feeding to this glass ceiling effect, which we see, which is a kind of a barrier and which stops or hampers their growth. And this glass ceiling gives rise to gender imbalance and unhealthy and unsafe working environment, because women also face all sorts of harassment at work. And to repair this leaky pipeline, the way we have to do is engage the graduates, which we are doing at university level, recruit as many postdocs as possible, and keep them, support them so that we can keep them in the system and retain them, especially the mothers who had to leave because of their family situations and who couldn't get funding and support. We have to find a way to support their careers and sustain them in the system so that we can create the gender balance and a safe working environment. So flexibility, providing position, funding, and support, physical and mental, is needed to change this imbalance which we have created now in STEM. So what we are going to do, IAU Women in Astronomy Working Group is going to facilitate, is going to help towards the career of women, or support the development of career of women researchers and maintain the gender balance. For that, we are trying to engage as many women researchers as possible from all over the world. You must have seen it, at least with our newsletter, the activities which are going on. And we will also be publishing Ensemble magazine with women researchers from all over the world, and also men researchers who are helping women researchers and who are supporting their career. They will be equally invited to participate in our activities, and they are the good examples whom we need to discuss also. We are also going to provide training and mentoring, because remember, these women who are not given permanent position or work part-time, they also get half of their time for training and for getting updated with the research activity which is going on. So we need to somehow provide this missing time of training. So we have started training sessions for that, bi-monthly seminar series and training sessions. And men are welcome to provide training in data analysis, programming, or writing publications, proposals, grants, etc. We are also trying to look for some fundraising and provide financial support so that we can retain the career of women researchers, and we will work in collaboration with IAU and international collaborators to sustain the career of women researchers. So IAU itself, this organization is supporting women career in research. They have set a good example, and we will be hearing a talk from Professor Deborah Green, who is going to talk about IAU Women in Astronomy Working Group, and she has been supporting a lot of our activities. But we need funding to help the career of women in astronomy at every stage. We need role models at every stage. Even ERC is doing it. So it's not only about IAU, ERC is also doing it. They also have their objectives to raise awareness and improve the gender balance. And they think it is important to have gender balance at work. And they are striving for gender balance among the ERC peer reviewers and funding, which they give to the male and female scientists. And there is effort also going on from many other organizations all over the world. And so that's the last slide. What are the important points to take away is that 20% women in STEM subjects, lack of role models, lack of proper funding, lack of awareness and training program, and efforts are needed from institutes and university to hire women researchers. And why do we care to have women researchers? Why do we want to achieve this gender balance? It is first of all to justify their career, also choice that they made and their hard work they had put in, to remove the biases in STEM topics, create balanced working environment, create better working environment, which is better for mental health of everyone. Institutes also get recognition, not only for science, but for the equality, diversity, and inclusion practice that they follow. It becomes an attractive workplace to be. And women add emotional intelligence and strong team spirit, diversity, and feeling of togetherness in the working environment. So it's good to have women. And they also equally like to work on, they count on men colleagues. So everyone feel welcome. So that's better environment. And the question raised is also, if we don't make efforts in hiring women researchers, and if there are very less positions, then how can we really encourage women to take up career in research? And so balancing gender gap is an interest of everyone, and we have to really work towards it. So I thank everyone for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have some.
So let's thank Mamta for a very nice talk, and and for spelling out exactly what we plan to be doing. Obviously, they are ambitious plans we have, but we do hope that with everyone's support and inputs, we would be able to achieve the goals we are planning to, and make a really effective group that could truly be useful to women. That's what we'd like. So we can take a few questions if we have any just now. You could use the chat window, or you could even
yes,
unmute yourself and speak.
Right, so we don't have any further questions.
Okay, we take ones at the end, no problem.
It was that, yes.
So maybe we move on to Deborah.
Right, so we will move forward to the next talk of today's session, and that's by Professor Deborah Green. She is the president of the International Astronomical Union. She is professor of astronomy at Maria Mitchell Chair at Vassar College, New York, USA, and is past president of the American Astronomical Society. Her main research interest is star formation and structure in local and high redshift galaxies. She is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Science, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and the American Astronomical Society. In 2018, she was awarded the George Van Risbroek Prize for her service to astronomy and NASA Hubble Space Telescope 25th Anniversary Commendation for Contribution in Science in 2015. And as a person, from our experience, we can really say that she's a very approachable and very encouraging lady, and we look upon her with to help the women's situation in astronomy with the IAU. So Professor Deborah.
Well, thank you so much. And it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm really grateful to Mamta and Priya for starting such a very active Women in Astronomy working group. And I'm delighted to see all the many activities you have, starting with this seminar series. So thank you for getting all this underway. And thank you to all the many people who have already joined the working group. And I'm going to talk about my experience. So it's a rather personal view of women in astronomy because I'm older than most of you. I'm in the generation of 10% women. And so I'll tell you a bit about my journey, a little bit about my research, because that ties into women's issues. And I'll talk about women in astronomy in the US, and then I'll transition to talking about IAU activities. So let me share my screen. We've been through such an unprecedented 1.5 years with all the global suffering from many fronts. And as we begin to emerge, we realize that we have new opportunities to strengthen our efforts. However, many sectors have recognized that women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, by work issues often related to being primary caregivers for children or elderly parents. And as we just heard from Mamta's excellent talk, of course, this impacts us even without a pandemic, but it's particularly exacerbated because of the recent conditions. If all things were equal because of regardless of gender, we wouldn't need a working group, but of course we still have a long way to go to achieve equity, as we saw from all the statistics that Mamta just showed us. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey then. I was the third class of women at Princeton University. It was a 200-year-old university that only in 1969 started admitting women. And so since I was very recent there were about 20% women at the university when I enrolled. So I was the first woman to graduate with a degree in astrophysics. In my physics classes, there were typically 40 men and there were 2 other women. And so I was a bit isolated. I didn't realize I was isolated, but that was the fact. I was not aware of any study groups, for example. I was afraid to knock on professors' doors. It wasn't a particularly warm and nurturing atmosphere. I loved it there, but it just wasn't nurturing. And I see that in hindsight, now that I'm a professor, I see the difference in what could be done to encourage everyone. I went to Harvard for my PhD. At the time, there were no women on the faculty, but by then many women had gotten PhDs from Harvard. And I was privileged to meet Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, who was the first woman to get a PhD from Harvard in 1925. And in her very famous thesis, she was the first to show that stars were mostly hydrogen and helium. Now, she was not the first to be recognized for having discovered this. Men subsequently took credit for it, but then it was later recognized. No, she really was the one who showed that in her thesis. She was just quite a remarkable woman. And then I went on to become a Carnegie postdoctoral fellow at the Carnegie observatories. At the time, they were called the Mount Wilson and Las Campanas observatories in Pasadena, and that meant using the Palomar Observatory. So I was the first woman to hold that position. And I've been at Vassar College since 1985. Now, there were some years in between in which I was a postdoc at IBM. And not coincidentally, my husband, who's also an astronomer, is permanently employed at IBM now. He wasn't at the time that I was a postdoc. We've been leapfrogging around each other. But I had children in the interim, so in 1983 and 1985, and that impacted my career. It slowed me down. I didn't have a break in the career, but I did become part-time when my children were young. And the National Science Foundation at the time had a program called the Visiting Professorship for Women that was meant to help women who were had some career stoppage or going to part-time status. And so in fact, that's what started me at Vassar. I was an adjunct professor for a course, and then I got the NSF visiting professorship, which allowed me to work part-time while my kids were little. And then I got a permanent position in 1990. So I've been there since 1985. And what's special about Vassar is that America's first woman astronomer, Mariah Mitchell, was the first professor hired by Matthew Vassar when the college first opened. So Vassar, unlike Princeton, has a long history of women in science and women doing astronomy. Vassar actually went co-ed the same time that Princeton did. So in 1969, we started admitting men, and now it's about 50-50. So most of my classes are evenly balanced in gender, and my women students look around and see themselves in their classmates and see themselves in the professors. So again, stressing the importance of role models so that you feel like you do belong. So that was, it's been a very a welcoming place. And just as a side note for the young people listening, I didn't intend necessarily to be a professor at a small college. That was not my career goal. My career goal was to do observational astronomy. And I didn't really think a whole lot about where that would be done. I thought maybe I would be at Kitt Peak. At the time, that was the big deal observatory. Maybe I would stay at Palomar. I just wanted to be where there were telescopes. And then I thought, well, I like to teach. And most of the time you're doing astronomy, you're at a university or a college. And because I am in a two-body problem with my husband also being an astronomer, this is what happened to work out. And I couldn't be happier. Looking back, it's a career choice that I would take in a heartbeat if I knew what lay ahead. But at the time, I couldn't have predicted it. So what I always tell my students is that have a horizon in mind where you want to get to, but not a fixed point on the horizon, because there's so many different paths that can get you there. So knowing I wanted to do observational astronomy, I picked one of many different paths that could have gotten me there. And so just be flexible in your outlook for what might be your career choice, because it might not be what you expect at any given time. So Mamta asked me to talk a little bit about what I'm doing in my research. I look at galaxies at local and high redshift. For about 20 years, I studied spiral structure and density waves, or galaxies without density waves. I look at star forming complexes and disk evolution. And I've observed at a variety of optical and infrared and radio telescopes. And as I look at this list, we take for granted that there are telescope opportunities for everyone, but that wasn't always the case, as I'll describe more in a few minutes. So when I was a postdoc at Palomar, I was on the mountain 1 week out of every month for a couple of years, and that was glorious. Kitt Peak and Cerro Tololo, the Carnegie observatories in Chile, and the Gemini observatories north and south, and then Arecibo before it collapsed. I was there as a summer student in 1975, a variety of other radio telescopes, including ALMA today. And the last 20 years, I've mostly done my research from using the Hubble and Spitzer space telescopes. And I'm excited about time on the upcoming James Webb Space Telescope. It looks like we're actually getting close to launch. So here is a favorite pair of galaxies of mine. I've been looking at them for 20 years with Hubble and with Spitzer, and more recently with ALMA, looking at the stars and the dust distribution and the gas distribution, doing computer simulations of how they interact. I've done a lot of work with Spitzer looking at embedded regions of star formation, because the high mass stars that are obscured by the dust lanes can illuminate the dust around them. And so it's particularly intriguing to look at 8 microns in the infrared and look at these knots of star formation, which you can see in the optical and the spiral arms, but they really stand out as you go to the infrared. And so here's another example of looking in 8 microns at this galaxy, and then doing an unsharp masked image to smooth out the underlying disk, and then all the bright knots of star formation show up. And the other area I'm particularly excited about is the ultra deep field. I've done a lot of work in galaxies here. As you know, this was the deepest image ever taken with Hubble. There are about 10,000 galaxies in this field. As we look at part of the UDF, we see that there are some familiar spirals and ellipticals, but a lot of galaxies look rather unusual. They're much more clumpy than today's galaxies. And so I spent some time classifying every galaxy that could be resolved. So this turned out to be about 1,000 galaxies out of the 10,000. We're large enough to see structure. So we see spirals and ellipticals and a lot of clumpy types. And I began to study these clumpy types at different redshifts to see when it was that spirals became prominent. And it turns out that's at about redshift 2, when the universe is about a third its current age. And so we see spirals. Some of them look very familiar. Here we have a grand design galaxy. This one, as we look on the right in H band, we can see an infrared bar that stands out. These are rather normal looking spirals. These spirals on the bottom look like spiral galaxies, sort of. So we don't see local galaxies that are quite like these. The arms are a little too fat, a little too distorted, but they're on their way to becoming spirals. And so I've done a lot of work with people who do simulations. And so you start off with a disk with random patches of clumps of star formation and just let it evolve. So in a series of time steps, you see a clumpy galaxy become a spiral galaxy where the large clumps tidally interact, and some of them go to the center to build up a bulge. Some of them are dispersed to make up the exponential disk. And from a side view, you see the clumpy galaxy initially, and after about a gig a year, you get the normal profile of an edge-on spiral galaxy. So we envision that we have a transition from the clumpy galaxies in the early universe, when there was a lot of gas and the universe was very turbulent, the disks were turbulent, so you had to have very massive regions of star formation, and then conditions became more quiescent, and so you settled down and began to be able to develop spiral structures. So we get a galaxy that looks familiar to us after about 1 billion years of that galaxy's evolution. And then more recently, I've turned to local galaxies that are very small and not very evolved. And so they look a lot like some of the galaxies we see at high redshift. So these are tadpole galaxies with a massive star-forming head and then a tail behind them with various knots of star formation. And it turns out through spectroscopy, you see that the head is very low metallicity. And the implication is that these galaxies are accreting gas from the cosmic web, which is pristine gas, and that stimulates new star formation. So to do all this, I needed observatories. And the generation before me, women could not apply for observing time at Palomar Observatory, where I was a postdoc. Margaret Burbidge, a very famous astronomer who worked on quasars and galaxies and chemical abundances, she was part of the B²FH paper, Burbidge, Fowler, and Hoyle, in which they talk about nucleosynthesis in the early universe. But she couldn't apply for observing time. Women weren't allowed. But her husband, Jeff, was a theorist, but also an astronomer. So he would apply for time that she would then use to observe. And Vera Rubin, as you all know about her work on rotation curves and dark matter, she was invited by the director in the mid-60s to observe at Palomar. And she said, well, why didn't you allow women earlier? And he said, well, for one thing, there aren't any women's bathrooms. Of course, they're all single stall bathrooms anyway. So what? So she famously took a piece of paper and drew a skirt on it and pasted it over the male logo on the door and said, well, that solves that. By the 1970s, the scene was changing. When I was a postdoc, I was actually the first female to be in the prime focus cage at the 200-inch. Here's a man climbing down into it. And I was also the last to use the prime focus cage because during that era, CCDs came along and took the place of photographic plates. So when I was there, you would climb into the telescope and then you would change plates between exposures. So you had to stay in the telescope all night. It was the most glorious feeling in the world. I would have a suit on that was like an astronaut suit because, of course, galaxies you observe in the winter, it was quite cold, and I would plug in my suit to heat it up and listen to music and have the sky above me while the exposure was taking place, and while I would be doing the fine control motion for the photographs. And it was probably the best time of my life. Anyway, Wendy Friedman, the one who's done so much work on the Hubble constant, was the second female postdoc about 5 years after me. And she went on to become the first female director of the Carnegie Observatories. Margaret Burbidge, meanwhile, in 1972, became director of the Royal Greenwich Observatory. Well, in the 1960s, people started thinking about creating a national observatory, and it wasn't because people were concerned about women not having access to telescopes like Palomar. It was because astronomers at universities that didn't have telescopes wanted to have telescopes. So there was a famous debate between Jesse Greenstein at Caltech, who controlled Palomar at the time, and Leo Goldberg, who was at Michigan and then Harvard. And even though those were very wealthy universities, they didn't have funding to build big telescopes. And so Leo Goldberg said, really, we ought to have federal funds invested in facilities that everyone could use. And Jesse Greenstein said, nah, we've got our money, we've got our big telescopes, we don't need that. Well, as you know, Kitt Peak National Observatory was founded then so that, in fact, everyone could have access, and that meant women could have access too. So Vera Rubin turned out to be one of the very first observers on the 4-meter telescope, and here she is at the top. Sydney Wolfe was the first female director of Kitt Peak in the 1980s. She went on to become director of the Gemini Project to develop the twin 8-meter telescopes, and she's now advising us on the US ELT project. We're waiting to hear the results of the US Decadal Survey, but this was a request to build both the 30-meter telescope and the Giant Magellan Telescope under the umbrella of one organization, AURA, and this would give us telescopes in the north and south. So anyway, she's been advising on that. And of course, we have the upcoming Vera Rubin Observatory under construction, formerly known as LSST, and the Nancy Roman Space Telescope, formerly known as WFIRST, and these are the first observatories named for women. So significant things are happening at this time, again, just when I was beginning to come on the scene. So I was so fortunate for these women that came before me. There's really a leveling of the playing field when suddenly there's open access to telescopes and data internationally. So those that are federally funded in the US are open to anyone in the world. And so there are a lot of big telescopes now around the world, and some of them are private and some of them are public. And it makes a huge difference if you can, in fact, expect that if you have an idea, you can propose to a telescope with open access. And if it's warranted, then you'll get time. The other thing that changed, and this is brand new as of just a couple of years ago, as I'm sure you're aware, is that Hubble Space Telescope started having a dual anonymous peer review for the proposals. And that was so successful. What started it was noticing, doing statistics, that there weren't nearly as many women getting observing time on Hubble as men for the PIs. And so Ken Zimbach, who's the director at Space Telescope Science Institute, said, let's try doing it anonymously for the proposals. And let's also flip it so that the reviewers are anonymous too. And this caught on so that more and more observatories are starting to do this dual anonymous or double blind proposal review, which has really improved statistics. So I think that those are both very positive steps, open access and anonymous review. So AURA is the managing organization for the US federal ground-based and optical and infrared telescopes, plus Hubble, plus James Webb when it launches. And this is what the AURA board looked like when it was founded in 1957, bunch of old white men in suits. And this is what AURA looks like today. I just finished my term as the first female chair of the board, and there I am at Haleakala a few years ago when the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope was just under construction. Sarbani Basu was vice chair with me, and she was the first female vice chair, and now Maura Hagen is chair. So we've got women starting to take the leadership roles there. So let's look at a broader view of history of women in astronomy in the US. Margaret Burbidge was awarded the Annie Jump Cannon Prize in 1971, and she declined it because she said the prize available only to women was in itself discriminatory. She didn't want to win a prize that was just for women. Many years later, jump ahead, the American Astronomical Society only began a fellows program in 2019, and Margaret Burbidge was named the first inaugural fellow. This was right before she died. The American Astronomical Society Council then convened a committee to review the status of women in astronomy because they were disturbed that Margaret had refused the Cannon Prize. So they said, let's look into women's issues. And they formed a working group in 1972. Then in 1979, that became a permanent committee. And that's when I got a PhD. So I got involved in the committee, became chair in 1991, and I started the AAS Women newsletter. And at the time, this was, got to remember, excuse me, 1991, computers were sort of a new thing. Internet was sort of new. And so I started a newsletter by emailing about 70 women and asking them to write to other people and let them know that this newsletter would exist. And we had a weekly emailing. And so they would send me a note saying, here's something I'm concerned about. Here's a job issue, a family related to career issue. Here's a harassment issue. And we began posting these notes to get input from people so that women could see that other women were going through things they were going through, and also to, if we could, propose some suggestions or solutions. So this is a permanent fixture now. You can look at the weekly postings or elect to receive them yourself if you wish, but this is now flourishing as an ongoing feature. And I think this has made a big difference in helping women realize they're not alone. So the Women in Astronomy Conference in 1992 was the first gathering of women. It was held at the Space Telescope Science Institute. And here I am with my husband, a couple hundred people, including some men scattered here and there, but of course dominated by women. And it led to what's known as the Baltimore Charter, which also led to one of the first gender in the workplace surveys. And the charter was to address the need to develop a scientific culture within both men and women can work effectively, in which we can all have rewarding careers. And note that even then, they say that the focus is on women, but actions taken to improve the situation of women should be applied aggressively to those minorities even more disenfranchised. A very important point. And of course, this later led to the formation on the committee of the status of minorities in astronomy within the AAS, and also to committees like the Diversity and Inclusion Working Group of the IAU. In the Baltimore Charter, a number of important comments, but especially I like the ones in blue. Women and men are equally capable of doing excellent science, and diversity contributes to, rather than conflicts with, excellent science. So the charter talks about a recruitment, training, evaluation, and award system, which will help advance women rather than prevent their participation, and to talk about formal and informal mechanisms that will help. And increasing the number of women ultimately will improve the environment, which will then increase the number of women some more. So this charter was endorsed by the American Astronomical Society and by a large number of US astronomy departments as a step forward in equality. After the Baltimore meeting, there was a second Women in Astronomy meeting in Pasadena in 2003, which led to the Pasadena recommendations that summarize some of the points in the earlier charter. Women and men are equally talented and deserving, and full participation of men and women will maximize excellence. And an important point, the measure of equality, of equal opportunity is outcome. Gender equity will have been attained when the percentage of women in the next level of advancement equals the percentage in the pool. And there were some more committee meetings or Women in Astronomy meetings after that, which led to the Committee on the Status of Women of the AAS developing a strategic plan last year with focus areas on harassment, inclusive environments, development, and operations, with some policies and training and advocacy and accessibility. And this plan I bookmarked here in case you'd like to look in more detail. One thing that was important that the AAS did along the way is to allow self-nominations. The committees noticed that there were a lot more men than women being nominated for prizes, and therefore a lot more men than women who were winning the prizes, which is not to say that the men were more deserving of prizes than women. The women just were not being nominated. So they started off on a trial for some of the prizes, allowing self-nominations, and eventually they realized this was really working. They were getting a lot more women applying and a lot more women winning the prizes because they just were not recognized before because they hadn't been noticed. And I think this is a really important point. So the fraction of female winners has gone up. It's important for women to be nominated. And if you're in a department that is predominantly pushing the men, then that you're at a disadvantage. And so sometimes you need to be able to stand up for yourself. And I think it's important for all of us to recognize there are many prizes that help women gain respectability and prominence that you can nominate someone even if you're not at that institution. I think that it will help if we all help each other in this way. It's an important step. Just look at the AAS female presidents. AAS was founded 20 years before the IAU, and Margaret Burbidge was president in 1976. She was the first female. Sydney Wolfe a few years later, and then a long string of women. So Andrea Dupree, Nilla Sargent, Katie Pilichowski. And then when I became president, David Helfand was president after me, but the next four were all women. Paula Scotti is the current president. So now I think we need to let men know it's still okay for them to be president too. There's always a slate with men and women now, but the women have just been beating them out. Sort of amusing. Anyway, let's flip to the IAU and its mission. So it was founded in 1919, originally to bring people together to exchange their astronomical knowledge. But now we've got 12,000 individual members and junior members from 83 countries with lots of divisions, commissions, and working groups. But we still have overall about 20% women, about 35% among the junior members, which is very encouraging, and partly why we started having junior members, because we knew that there were more women in that age group. So the mission of the IAU has expanded, and now we focus not only on research, but also on communication, education, and development. So here's what a General Assembly looked like in Leiden in, oh, I cut off the date, that was in 1922, I believe. And so here we see what it looked like with a bunch of men, and there were a few women present. And over on the side is the executive committee, all men. And then we skip ahead to Cambridge at Harvard in 1932. There's Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin in the front row. Not sure the other women here, again, mostly men, handful of women. And now we flip ahead to today. And so we've had now 4 female presidents. Catherine Cesarski was our first, quite a bit later than the AAS, the 30 years later, so in 2006. But then we've had 3 women presidents in a row. If we look at the officers, in 2015, 2018, we had Aveen Van Dijk and Sylvia Torres-Peinbert, Piero Benvenuti, General Secretary, and Teresa Lago, the Assistant General Secretary. And then the last triennium, 3 women, and then Jose Miguel Rodriguez Espinosa is now our General Secretary. So here are the current officers, 2 and 2, and this was by design. We want to make sure women are in the higher ranks, but not exclusively. It really should be a balance. And so we have Willie Benz as the president-elect, Diana Worrell as Assistant General Secretary, along with Jose Miguel and me. The first IAU General Secretary was Edith Mueller in the 1970s, and she had an assistant who was known as Miss IAU. And we've had 2 other female secretaries, Jacqueline Bergeron, and then Teresa Lago just finished her term. The first female vice president was Wilhelmina Ivanowska from Poland. There she is. And then the second female vice president was Yi Shuahua from China. The executive committee a few years ago looked like this. This includes some division presidents. There's my husband, who was a division president when I was at the time a vice president. So there were half vice president females and about 30%, 35% division presidents who were female. Here's our current executive committee, and we've got equity. Very excited about this. And so through elections, it just turns out that we had equal numbers then of women and men across the board in the officers, as well as the vice presidents, and then our secretariat, Rosaria and Madeline, of course, are female. Division presidents, also we have, in this case, 5 women and 4 men. So that's excellent. And so we've really got at the top ranks equity. So let's look a little bit at the IAU strategic goals, 5 overarching goals that we developed through our strategic plan: to foster worldwide coordination and exchange of information, to promote the inclusive advancement of astronomy, to promote the use of astronomy as a tool for development, to engage the public, and to stimulate STEM education. So we've got the four main offices: the Office for Young Astronomers that hosts the International Schools for Young Astronomers, the Office of Astronomy for Development, the Office of Astronomy for Education, and the Office of Astronomy Outreach, which is a communications network. We have lots of working groups, as you know. The Working Group on Global Coordination is focused on using our collective expertise in building large observatories and instruments and understanding the massive volumes of data. And we believe that the best science will be achieved when we have a diverse and inclusive global community working together. So there are workshops in between the General Assemblies focused on particular issues. In education, we have the new OAE. In fact, its workshop is starting today. It lasts for the next couple of days. That's the third workshop. And that focuses on training K-12 teachers to use astronomy for education. So it's a STEM gateway. We just formed a memorandum of understanding with the International Association of Physics Students, which connects us with the undergraduates. We have training through the International Schools for Young Astronomers, and we have mentoring and networking for the postdoc level through our junior membership. And we're just starting the hands-on specialized workshops, which will allow training for early career astronomers in developing countries on specific instrumentation. The International School for Young Astronomers program has been going on for half a century. And so there have been over 1,500 students that have participated in these 3-week intensive graduate school level programs, which include lectures and exercises and observations and mentoring. And Monica Rubio, who's current president of Division H, was an ISIA student many years ago. So men and women have long participated equally in these programs. The Office of Astronomy for Development just celebrated its 10th anniversary, and it's engaged hundreds of thousands of people globally and regionally. And the key programs apply technologies and techniques used in astronomy to sustainable development goals in local communities. So that's been highly successful. And this past year, particularly targeted proposals related to the pandemic, crowdsourcing, tracking of diseases, again, using big data techniques. And so that's been very effective. And the OAO has had enormous global reach in over 100 countries through its projects, which include getting telescopes to local communities, promoting women and girls in astronomy, which of course your working group participated in, and the translation network, and the communicating astronomy to the public. The IU has elevated the diversity and inclusion working group to the executive committee level, along with the Women in Astronomy, in order to try and become more inclusive and diverse. And there was a meeting a few years ago working on equity issues. And in 2019, the meeting led to the IU Springboard for Action. So we strive for all of our meetings to be inclusive and welcoming, and Springboard Action helps dictate those actions. And of course, the executive committee working groups, yours and junior members in diversity and inclusion, and the code of conduct, which everyone must agree to in order to participate in our meetings. Doesn't mean there aren't still problems, but it just reminds people that we do have certain standards. IAU 100 had a lot of activities, many of them targeted for women and girls. There were 260 activities in 70 countries, and a lot of them highlighted women's issues. There's a particularly charming project in South Africa, which is the winner of an events competition, which engaged women and girls. I just love this picture. And the Telescopes for All project, which is ongoing now in 100 Hours of Astronomy that just concluded recently. We continue to, through various arrangements, give out telescopes to groups who propose how they would use them and in what capacity. And then we have PhD division prizes, as you know, and those have just opened up. Get your application in by December 15th. And so this is for the best PhD prize in each division. And so it started off, in fact, my husband was division president at the time, and his division president's group said, we want to award prizes. So it started off with a couple of women out of the 9 divisions. And in 2020, 8 out of 10 prizes awarded were to women. So overall, we've done very well at having equity in those PhD prizes, which is very encouraging. There's also the Gruber postdoctoral fellowships, and there's a March 31st deadline for those. These are for people who have or are about to take on postdoctoral positions, and this is additional research funding at the level of 25 to 50,000. And so overall, since it started a few years ago, we've had 13 out of 28 awards have gone to women. So let's look at statistics among the IAU members. And Francesca Primus, the previous chair, a couple of trienniums ago of the working group, did a lot of work on statistics. And I know that Mamta and Priya and you all are going to be active in that again. So here are the statistics over the years, sort of hovering around 10% for a long time, now pushing in the last few years to maybe 20%, still disappointingly low, but at least there is some upward trend. And Madeline in the Secretariat has helped produce a lot of these statistics. The younger generation is at about the 35% level. And these statistics prompted the formation of the working group on junior members, realizing that younger people are much more likely to be a higher percentage of women. Again, the leaky pipeline problem that Mamta showed us, but also just overall more women are starting off in the field. Whether or not they continue is a matter we need to address. But the junior members then are bringing in at least a more equally proportioned membership to our base. So let's look at the gender distribution in 2015. So what's red is good. So Argentina, Venezuela, Thailand at a high level. We see green is 10 to 20% level. Not naively, I would have thought that the US was doing pretty well. I knew it was at the 10% level. For me, I know that women in my class are 50%, and that students getting an undergraduate degree in astronomy in the US are about 50% women. But it's disappointing to see that, nope, we're no better than most of the rest of the world at the 10 to 20% level. Look at it in 2018. And so we see some improvement in some countries. If it's gray here, we don't have statistics, but here we see now Peru is at a high level. Argentina has moved up to more than 40%. Russia has moved from green to yellow. So that means in the 20 to 30% range, and some other countries coming in with higher numbers too. India improved from the less than 10% to the 10 to 20%. So there's improvement overall, long ways to go, but at least it's going in the right direction. I think the statistics that you all will be taking on will help keep track of how we're doing and to see where it's really good and what are they doing there that's different than elsewhere that could help give us some insight. We now keep track of female speakers at IAU symposia. It's in the guidelines for proposing a symposium that you in fact try to have equity on your LOC, SOC, and invited speakers and contributed speakers. So this is keeping track over the past several symposia, looking at the fraction of females among participants. That's the grayish area here. Invited speakers in blue and contributed in orange, a big spike in one of them. But it's overall at the 30% level. Well, that's better than the fraction of females in the IAU, but it's still not 50%. So it's been constant for a rather long time. So we'll look to improve that. As you know, the General Assemblies have Women in Astronomy lunches, which your group helps host. And here we see from 2018, Bob Williams, there were some men allowed to, of course, Bob Williams, the former president of the IAU, Meg Urey, a strong women's rights advocate, Franz Cordova, who was at the time the chair of the National Science Foundation, the director, with women and the occasional man getting together to sit down over lunch and talk about particular topics and to just give some advice and to listen to concerns. And it's always been hugely successful with typically several hundred participants in that. So I look forward to us being able to do that again in Busan next summer, COVID permitting. You all have been involved, many of you have been involved in the gender gap study, and that will be a focus for your working group. The International Science Council started this 3-year survey of women in the sciences. And so here's the report if you haven't seen it. And it was designed to look at what the statistics are across different fields, across the world, and to see what the issues are. And Francesca Primus helped lead the IAU efforts in this over the years. What's most revealing about the study, I thought, was that there are universal problems in all sciences, even though we know there are more women in biology, for example, than in physics or astronomy. That's not to say they don't have similar problems involving harassment, involving career advancement. And this was, I thought, eye-opening and very discouraging, that about 30% of all respondents reported some kind of harassment or sexual harassment during their careers. Now, I saw this when I was the chair of the Committee on the Status of Women in the AAS. I saw it often. It was very disheartening. I was one of the lucky ones, I must say. I never experienced harassment or discrimination. I never felt that, but I was flooded by letters and discussions with women who had. So it's a very real problem, very serious. It's worldwide. It's not any particular field or any particular country. And so we really have to get at the root of what's happening. So the Gender Gap Report had a lot of recommendations for individuals, institutions, and scientific unions. So regarding the scientific unions, like the IAU, they say, work collectively to change the culture and norms, share policies, toolkits, learnings, define best practices regarding sexual harassment and discrimination, and recommend proper accounting of childbearing and caring responsibilities. For example, we have childcare available at the IAU General Assemblies because we recognize that can be a barrier for many, many people. Actively promote the visibility of female scientists and encourage the diversification of scientific awards. And again, actively encourage the nomination of women. I think this is key. If more women are recognized at high levels through positions and awards, that will help all of us. Encourage women to be on editorial boards. And so this was generic for all unions, I would say, and on evaluation committees, review committees, use double-blind reviews, which we've seen is effective. Just as a side note here, I think a big reason I'm in my current position is because I was early on, I was at a small college, and quite frankly, a lot of boards and review committees were trying to have women. So they began to be aware in my early career that women should be included more. And so I was often a token woman on a panel, but the fact that I was from a small college was good too, because, okay, it's not just big universities. And I had a joint appointment at Vassar and IBM for a while. And so they said, oh, great, we've got someone from industry, from a small college, and a woman. So I was called a threefer. And honestly, that got me on a lot of committees that I probably otherwise wouldn't have been on. There's a danger there of saying yes to too many things. And so you do have to be aware of that. But I always made it a point to say yes when I could. And therefore, I got known for wanting to do things, wanting to do service. You may decide you do or don't want to do service, but I found it very gratifying. And it also got me recognition. You know, people started to notice me. Oh, she's a go-to person. So I think if you're inclined to do that sort of thing, it's a really important career advancement tool. And I think that more of us who are in position to put people on committees or various types should make sure that women are strongly pushed for that. Welcome families and scientific activities and offer childcare solutions. Because I'm in a two-body situation, my husband and I in the same field, and we had two little kids, they got dragged around the world to meetings. Not necessarily the best way to go to meetings, but they, in hindsight, now that they're all grown up, said, yeah, no, that was kind of fun. It's not for everyone. And for those who are not in the situation we had, there need to be means of childcare solutions. Creating committees for women is important. Of course, we know that, and AAS knows that, but other organizations need to recognize that there's still a need for a separate group on women. Again, until equity is achieved, it's not appropriate to say, well, women's issues are everyone's issues and therefore we don't need a specific committee for women. Yes, the women's issues are everyone's issues, but we still need to focus directly on the things that impact the women the most. Actively promote gender balance and raise awareness. We want all of our symposia to include some component of talking about diversity and women, and this is in the guidelines from the Springboard to Action. So some of the things that the IAU explicitly is doing, again, there are more women now in high positions. And you can start, if you're so interested, by getting involved in working groups like the working group in Women in Astronomy, commissions, division steering committees, volunteer, become part of the leadership of that, propose to organize an IAU symposium. All of that will gain women more recognition. And then attract more women, give them more visibility by including them as speakers at symposia, going to the Women in Astronomy lunches. It's really crucial, again, as Mamta emphasized in her talk, that to have mentoring, to have role models. Young girls need to look up and look around and see that they can be anything too. And just a side note, very personal, I have a 4-year-old granddaughter and 2-year-old grandson. And I'm always telling my granddaughter, who's old enough to discuss these things, you know, you can be anything you want. You could be a scientist, you could be a doctor, you could be a dancer, you could be an artist, and you could be anything. And she looked at me and said, yeah, I know, but she said, what about Alex? He can be anything too, right? I said, yeah, no, boys can be anything. And so in her worldview, of course, women can do anything. She wanted to make sure that her little brother wasn't left out. So there's some hope if we let the younger generation know that they can do whatever they want to do, regardless of who they are. I think that's very important to reinforce. So things like the junior membership, the gender gap study, nomination for prizes, all of these are very important for getting equity. So I want to thank your working group again for all you're doing, Mamta and Priya especially, but all of you who will be participating in all of these activities. And of course, the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which overlaps in many of the efforts. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you all good luck as we all continue in this together. With that, I'll stop my share. Get to it, there we go, okay.
Right. Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk, Professor Elmgren. It was really great to see how courageous you have been during your career path and how remarkable you are today, standing as a role model for many young women and researchers, even for me. I'm very happy to be in contact with you. So that's really great. And we will take questions from the audience if they have any, but I can start with my question. I've got many, but I'll just put up the first one. And that is, what do you see 5 years from now, the situation of women in research, and what contribution do you expect from the Women in Astronomy Working Group in the next 3 years?
Oh, wow, those are great questions. I expect great things from this working group because I see the leaders of it. And I think that you've brought new energy to what you're going to be doing. And I think just to have people in charge who really care about women's issues, whether it's this group or anywhere else, that's the first step. So you all are already making a difference. I think that wanting to have an ongoing seminar series just reinforces that, hey, we can get together and talk about things. And it doesn't have to be a formal big meeting. It can be a small gathering just to let people know that we all want to hear what's going on, that you've got problems I want to hear, I've got problems maybe I can share with you and get help from. I think that reinforces that we're not alone, that the isolation you may feel at your institution or your department, whatever it is, you're not alone, because overall there's someone somewhere going through what you're going through, whatever it is, there's someone else going through it. So I think it's really important that we do stick together, let men know that they're part of the deal, as we'll hear next, and just reinforce that women need to be pushed. We need to push for more women. I think that's the key. I hope that in 5 years, we continue to see an upward trend. I don't expect a huge change. We were originally looking for how can we achieve equity in the IAU membership in the next 20 years. Piero Benvenuti, very strong supporter of women, past general secretary. wanted to achieve equity by 2040. And we looked at the statistics and we said, the numbers don't add up. We cannot possibly reach equity given that we're at the 20% level now. We can't do that in 20 years. There aren't enough bodies coming in to make those numbers work out. But with more and more junior members, which include more and more women, I think we're going to see more young people as role models for the people younger than them. And I think that's really critical. And I think that if each level we keep having at the level above someone to look up to, then that's going to start to make a difference. As you know, I mean, this has been going on for me for my 40-year career. It's been an ongoing issue. So it's disappointing that in that very long time frame, there hasn't been a whole lot of change. But certainly if I look at the generation earlier than me and my generation, I think how lucky I am that I came along just 20 years later. And I think for a lot of people today, the world will look a little better, not hugely better in 5 years, but a little better. And I think it will be more normal for women to be more prominent. And that's all we can hope for, small steps with a big goal in mind at the end. But I think you're on the right track.
Yes, thank you. We totally agree with you. And we're really very happy to hear your ideas for the future. Any question from the audience? You can unmute yourself. Yes, Priya, yes.
No, I was waiting for the others, but we shouldn't be grabbing up all the space. So thanks, Deborah. That was a very nice talk. I really loved it. It was really very nice. And but one of the problems which we've been talking about a lot is a lot of women face the imposter syndrome.
Yes.
Right? Where suddenly you're in this room where there are just men all around you, and you're the one or two women who are speaking, and you suddenly wonder, will people take me seriously? Do I really know it? So what would be your suggestion or your advice to women?
That is such an important issue. And I admit I had imposter syndrome too. In high school, I could do anything. I was going to conquer the world. By the time I got to college, surrounded by the men, and so even though I said I didn't feel discrimination as an undergraduate, I did feel inferior. I definitely did. I looked around and men not only had more advanced courses than me in high school, it turns out, and that evens out after a couple of years in college, but they were more sure of themselves. They were so confident even when they were wrong that it was not intimidating, but it definitely made me question myself. And I never believed that I was going to be an astronomer, but I often questioned whether everyone else was better. And this has continued throughout my career. It really has, that I often think, oh, what they're doing is better than what I'm doing, or that's more clever or something. So I think that it's a real thing. And I think that all you can do is remind yourself that we are equal, and some people have more skills in some areas than others, or maybe more clever ideas once in a while, but we can all do this. And so I tell my students, the most important thing is not to look around and wonder if you're as good as other people doing it. You are. You just, first of all, have to really, really, really want to do it, because let's face it, astronomy is hard. It's a small field. And so if you're going to succeed, you have to be passionate about it. But if you're passionate about it, just go out and do it. And that's what I kept telling myself. And often just going out on a clear night and looking up would remind me why I'm doing this. And I think that's the most important thing. Believe you can do it. Just keep telling yourself that you can.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That's so encouraging.
Thank you. We have a question from Gloria. What is your impression about prizes for women?
I think they're important. So I disagreed with Myra Burbage's attitude on that. I think that it was an important thing for the people, the First American Association of University Women, to sponsor the Annie Jump Cannon Prize, and then it got subsumed under the AAS brand. I thought that was an important step. They said, hey, there are good women out there, for whatever reason, they're not getting prizes they should be getting. Let's make a prize to recognize the women. And so I didn't take it as, I don't think I wouldn't have felt insulted as Margaret Burbage said, I think that, great, okay, there's a prize for women, wonderful, that's a recognition. I think we need to push more prizes. So I don't see a problem with that. Again, if all things were equal, then that would be silly. Why would there be a women's prize? There should be a man's prize too. But we're not there yet. So I think that they're important.
We have another question from Amy Jones. A common issue with doing service and inclusivity work is that the time and dedication competes with time for research or teaching.
It does.
Any advice for how to balance or encourage others to more prioritize this type of work?
That is very, very tough and a very important issue, because I know a lot of younger faculty are saying, well, I'd like to be involved, but yes, all these other things. You really have to decide what's important to you. Certainly, family cannot be shoved aside to do all these other things. If we could only stop eating and sleeping, maybe we'd gain a little more time, but even that would never be enough. And I think you just need to choose the things that are most important. So I encourage you to say yes to committees or department service that interests you. In my college, it's important to do some service, but again, a balance. So don't say yes to everything that comes along thinking you will fill your visa. Just like high school students applying for college, we don't want to see applicants who have been in 20 activities. We want to see that they've done 1 or 2 activities really, really well. So focus on the things that you care about. Don't be the token woman on everything that comes along. But if it's interesting to you, that means you'll want to put some time into it. And I think that's the way you start to keep a balance. Yeah, teaching and research, just balancing those two alone is hard enough without throwing in service and family issues. And it's, yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. I think you have to prioritize in your own mind where you need to draw lines and just stick to them. But don't be afraid to branch out when you're able to, because I think that's a good way to get ahead.
Right, very well said, and it's really true, whatever you have said. We can just go on agreeing with you to whatever you say. Because we're all experiencing the same situation.
We absolutely are, yeah.
Right, so let's thank again Professor Deborah Amel-Green for her great presentation and nice advice that she has been giving.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you very much. And let's go further with the next talk of today. So Priya is going to introduce the next speaker.
One sec. Sylvia, do you have something to say? You raised your hand. Okay. Yeah. So thanks, Mamta. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, who's Santiago. So Santiago Vargas Dominics, sorry for my pronunciation, is Associate Professor at the National University of Columbia and Research Coordinator of the National Astronomical Observatory of Columbia. His research interests are focused on the study of the sun, in particular the analysis of magnetic fields and energetic events in our star. He's a member of the Royal Astronomical Society, the International Astronomical Union, and the European Astronomical Society. He's currently the IAU National Coordinator, Astronomy Education Coordinator for Columbia. And we're really happy to have Santiago with us because, like Deborah mentioned, the men are also with us. We are all together in this, and we would like to hear their ideas or their views about this. So Santiago, over to you.
Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this first seminar of our working group. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm very grateful to contribute to this working group. I think we need much more spaces like this one to stress the importance of these topics that we are talking about. So let me first give you an overview of my presentation. So first of all, I'm going to highlight some facts that we have to be aware of in this gender imbalance topic. Second, I'm going to talk about specifically about the systematic problem of this gender imbalance, and then how we can think about a sort of solution. How are the positive actions that we can do in order to close the gap? In number 4, I'm going to talk about why men should care about gender equality, but probably not only men, but all of us should be caring about this topic of gender equality. And finally, I'm going to comment some ideas for commitment. So already Mamta and Deborah have put some important statistics concerning the identification of this gender imbalance in research, but I'm going to show you some more in order to stress once more some of the difficulties experienced by women in that respect. So let me start by showing this recent publication in Nature. This was 3 weeks ago, in which there are some evidences of gender imbalance and the difficulties faced by women in research. For example, as someone asked Deborah some minutes ago about prices, the women's share of international prizes rewarding research experience and excellence is increasing, but still lags behind the proportion of professional positions held by women. This was revealed according to an analysis of more than 140 top science prizes awarded over the last 2 decades. The results show that the number of awards honoring female scientists have increased in the last 20 years, but women remain underrepresented in these career-defining prizes, which are often peer-nominated and decided on by previous recipients. But when women receive the deserved prizes, they receive less money and also less prestige than men, an average of 64 cents for every dollar received by men. These curves show this inequality trend. So although the proportion of professors who are women has increased in recent decades, the percentage of top research prizes going to women still lag behind. There is also less of a disparity in early career prizes, but as the status of awards increases, the gender gap widens. The point here is that women are not receiving fewer awards because of the quality or the quantity of their research, but instead it somehow is the result of an implicit bias coupled with the lack of proactive efforts to address inequalities in science. I don't know how familiar you are with the ideas behind this implicit bias, but anyhow, let me remind you that it refers to some attitudes, stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in somehow an unconscious manner. I'm sure that many of us have had these biases with activated involuntary and actually without any individual awareness of intentional control. But in the most general sense, it refers also to the implicit associations that we have in our subconscious, cause us to have feelings and attitudes about peoples based on characteristics such as race, ethnicity, age, and appearance. So the way to mitigate this implicit bias is to encourage to approach every encounter members of unprivileged or stereotyped social groups as an opportunity to reinforce and act out the commitment to egalitarian values. Delivery of bias-free science should become very common, and for doing so, we need a process involving practices, feedback, and reflection. So this is in the general sense, but obviously in the gender imbalance sense, we also should be caring about all this. So according to what we have seen in this seminar, we are moving in the right direction. That's right, that's good. But still, I think that this is being done very slowly. As an example, the very recent announcement of all May 2021 science novels. This is a text appearing in Nature last Friday, commenting on the fact that all 7 winners of the year's science prizes were men. Some say that this shows a disappointing lack of progress towards diversifying the award. So these new winners increase the gap between female and male scientists winning the Nobel Prize. We have 59 prizes won by 58 women out of more than 900 winners. So the gap is increasing with the announcement of this year. If we look into the winners for scientific disciplines, the numbers are even worse. Only a very few winners are female. This is sad because there are only very few Nobel laureates, and it reflects the unfair conditions in science and in society as a whole, particularly in years past, but still existing. And there is much more to do in this respect. So first step is to explicitly recognize that there is an imbalance and to analyze the needs and the actions to be taken. And this is what we are doing here in this seminar. So some of the women recently winning the Nobel Prize have highlighted, for example, the importance of receiving the prize for the purpose of inspiring more women and specifically girls as well. Here on the screen is Emmanuelle Carpentier. She was the last year's recipient of the Nobel Prize in Chemistry, and she mentioned how this provide also an opportunity to send a positive message, specifically to young girls who would like to follow the path of science, and to show them that women in science can also have an impact with the research that they are performing. She added that there was a clear lack of interest in following a scientific path, which is very worrying, I will say. Especially at the highest levels, it is clear that there is a systemic problem. The gender disparities reinforce a system that undervalue women and other underrepresented groups. And from the outset of their careers, women are credited less. This is what the numbers, the statistics are showing. Although a number of policies are emerging that support and encourage women's participation in development, women's access to resources, information, training, and education, still there is a very limited decision-making for these women. The good thing is that in the case of academia, there are, well, either the situation right now, we would say, is not that bad as it was probably 20 years ago, because more women than ever are starting careers in science. So women are more likely to start a research in science now than they were 20 years ago. It has been recently found that the proportion of women starting a career in science rose over time. In 2000, just a bit more than 30% of researchers starting their publishing career were women, and that number grew up to 40% in recent years. So although the overall picture looks positive for more women entering science, it's important to remember that the increase is an average over many countries and scientific disciplines, and that there is a huge variation within the numbers. And that's why it is important that we now have concrete statistics confirming the trend, and in particular for many countries and scientific disciplines, which are not probably taken into account in these statistics. Okay, so it was mentioned before the extreme condition that we experienced in the last year and a half to do research and to carry on with our normal lives. But also pandemics and the COVID-19 helped to actually deeper the problem. So gender differences in the academic productivity during COVID-19 show evidence of the imbalance for men and women. So most researchers began working from home, with women reporting a significant decrease in manuscript submissions, for example. Women also report providing 78% of the childcare themselves, compared to only 60% for men. So overall, significant disparities were observed in academic productivity by gender and child age during COVID-19. And this should be considered by academic institutions, obviously, and funding agencies when making decisions regarding, for example, funding, hiring, promotion, and tenures. We all know that publishing is very crucial when we are looking for grant support for research. So looking for a job also, and seeking for promotion and tenure. So that's why this should be a very important point to be aware of. Advancing general equality in research and innovation is actually fully embedded as a key objective in the EU gender equality policy. So more specifically, gender equality and gender mainstream, meaning the integration of a gender perspective in the preparation and evaluation of policies for academic research, is one of the priorities for the European research area. And this is taken from a document that I recommend you very much to have a look at, which is called Key Figures. This is the 2021 issue. The state of the plan of the European Union demonstrates that we are still a long way from achieving full gender equality. So while the number of women researchers in the EU over the past year has increased at a higher rate on average than men, only around 1/3 of the European Union researchers are women. Mamta already have shown some statistics, so I'm going to just mention very rapidly the ones that I have here. So as they move up to the academic ladder, women are even less represented, and especially in STEAM. In the EU, for example, the proportion of women among heads of institutions in the higher education sector stood from only 22%. That is a number from 2017. So it is clear that more effective implementation of the EU gender equality objectives by research and innovation is needed, not only across the European Union, but obviously across the whole planet. Since 2012, there is this European Commission's communication that is somehow highlighting the importance of gender equality as a priority, and this has been strengthened progressively. In 2020, there has been a commitment for equality in research and innovation through different measurements and initiatives. So key to achieve, for example, these objectives is the Horizon Europe 2021-2027, the Framework Program for Research and Innovation. So all these are seeking for trying to close the gap and all this and improve all these statistics regarding gender equality. So in this document, She Figures publication, this was first released in 2003, and it's updated every 3 years, sorry, it's updated. So they monitor and they compare the numbers every 3 years and try to see if the measurements are being effectively implemented or not. So I really encourage you to have a look at this freely distributed document. Once again, it's called She Figures 2021. But also it's good to remember that there is a 2030 agenda for the sustainable development. And this is meant to provide a unique opportunity to build more inclusive and equitable societies, and the gender balance is also part of it. So in September 2015, for the ones who are not aware of this, countries committed to a renewed framework for sustainability and development, and they adopted all this agenda for sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, which are now part of many policies all across the world. Also, this agenda recognizes the actions, for example, that individuals, communities, and governments need to take to secure the well-being of both people and the planet by promoting social and human development, environmental protection, economic prosperity, and equity. And inclusion is both a goal in itself, but also a means for attaining all the other SDGs. Actually, gender equality and gender empowerment is a key hub for the others. And this is taken from this work by Oct21 2011. And this is in particular very important for developing countries. So as you notice from this sketch, you have here the promote gender equality and women's empowerment as the central hub here for others like eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, reduce child mortality, combat AIDS and malaria and other diseases, improve maternal health, ensure environmental sustainability, and develop a global partnership for development. So this is just highlighting the importance of this, of thinking about these topics, and not only thinking about them, but also to promote actions towards the gender equality. And we can summarize in 4 points the so-called integrated framework for gender equality in academia. So there are 4 different aspects of a cultural conducive to gender equality. First is the equal access to resources and opportunities. So for example, laboratory space, equipment, salary, grants, leadership positions, mentoring, sponsorship. Number 2 is minimizing unconscious gender bias, which I talk a little bit about in the last minutes. Number 3, enhancing work-life balance and the integration. For example, extending tenure clock, parental leaves, on-site daycare. And number 4 is the leadership engagement. So in research, it has become increasingly clear that without this engagement of leadership at every single level, we won't have the proper impact to support women that at the moment are limited. So in that sense, I want to stress, and obviously you are here because you somehow understand the importance of equality, but also we need to think about the importance of how we are going to transform our perspective. So I normally show this slide, and this is a word where you somehow understand why this perspective transformation is the key process behind all changes that should be implemented in society. I'm just going to read very rapidly through it. So this is the process of becoming critically aware of how and why our assumptions have come to constrain the way we perceive, understand, and feel about our world. Changing these structures of habitual expectation to make possible a more inclusive, discriminating, and integrating perspective. And finally, making choices or otherwise acting upon these new understandings. And this is something that, in my personal opinion, I have always bear in mind when dealing with different situations in academia, but also in all different contexts. So now I also want to summarize a few points of why men should care about gender equality. So empathically, men should care about gender equality both within and outside the work context because different things. First, for example, because benefit from the better decisions, they can benefit from the better decisions and reduce risks. So this applies, for example, for communities, workplaces, and this result in a greater sharing of power and decision-making in public, but also in private life. The next one, experience enhanced physiological development and well-being, and this is resulting from being active participants in the process of change to improve outcomes for women in terms of economic, social resources, power, work, opportunities, health, and well-being in general. Work in organizations that are more productive and creative, resulting from workplaces having a greater diversity of perspectives, which is always good for our place to have. Experience higher quality work, resulting from greater teamwork and collaboration, and reduce emphasis on competitiveness, for example. Experience enhanced personal growth and development, as well as increased skills, resulting from being actively involved as fathers and by making a significant contribution to their children's well-being, which is also something that men should be aware of. Experience obviously greater life satisfaction as well, resulting from increased involvement in caring for people who are elderly, disabled, or ill. And finally, well, not finally, this is just some of the ideas, but of course there are much more, but experience an increased sense of purpose, being active participants in a significant process of change. And this is something that somehow moves you towards the improvement of the conditions, not only for women, but also for the whole environment around you. So the challenge is therefore to change mindsets and behaviors. So we need guidance to facilitate implementation of targets to promote gender equality in research and innovation. So here are some practical steps to integrate gender perspective into a policy or a programming cycle. We need basically to define, to plan, to act, and to check. And in every single step, there are some important tools. For example, the statistics as part of the definition of the problem here, or the gender budgeting, for example, as a tool for planning, or the training initiatives and sessions and the awareness raising activities as a way to act. And finally, if you want to check if these steps are being done good or not, well, you have to check, and so you can monitor and you can evaluate. And obviously this is a cycle, so you all the time are looping around all the four, and actually in most of the time all these different steps can be done at the same time. Okay, so I have only like a couple of minutes left. So finally, let me show you and basically enumerate some of the commitments to promote gender equality in research centers. And this is taken from a recent summit for women's advancement and leadership in science in 2019. So first is we acknowledge that the research ecosystem cannot reach its full potential unless it benefits from the talent of all of us. Second, we acknowledge that advancing gender equality demands comprehensive and genuine commitment from research centers, in particular active leadership from those in senior roles. Number three, we are aware that initiatives and actions to support individuals alone will not sufficiently advance gender equality. We see the new gender priorities from local, national, and European governments, funding and assessment agencies as an opportunity to align individual actions. Number four, we acknowledge that gender inequalities are just an expression of the insufficient representation of diversity in science. We also acknowledge that individuals have multiple identities, and we commit to considering the intersection of those identities wherever possible. Number five, we commit to advancing gender equality in the centers, in particular addressing the loss of women across the career pathway and the absence of women from senior roles. Number six, we commit to tackling the gender pay gap, both vertically and horizontally for the same role and level of seniority. Number seven, we commit to taking action to remove the obstacles faced particularly by women at major points of career development and progression, and especially in the transition from the PhD into a sustainable research career. Number eight, we commit to addressing the consequences of labor contract interruptions and labor market rigidities for the retention and progression of staff in research centers, particularly women. There's only four left. So number nine, we commit to promoting sustainable structural and cultural changes to remove systemic barriers, unconscious biases, stereotypes, and inequities, and promote inclusive settings for diversity and family conciliation. Number 10, we commit to taking the opportunity of the new gender priorities for local, national, and European governments, funding and assessment agencies. Thus, in alignment with the HRS4R Charter and other European governments' initiatives, we engage in a genuine implementation of gender equity action plans. This is an acronym that you probably will find many times when talking about these issues. And commit into sharing our experience between centers for the benefit of mutual learning and support. 11, we commit to supporting and training our researchers to take a responsible approach to gender perspective in research and innovation, with the aim to strengthen the quality of knowledge production and benefit all individuals in society, regardless of gender. And finally, number 12, we commit to taking action beyond women's representation with the inclusion of any form of diversity. So summarizing, I think it's important to have all these different items in our agenda, not only our personal agendas, but also in the agenda of the centers we belong to, because in this respect, we act as the seed for spreading the word, so that we can together make a real change. So finally, let me also mention that we take advantage of every opportunity to highlight the work doing by women in different areas. For example, last week we have this World Space Week all around the world, and I was very pleased. There were many events showing women actions in this respect, in the aeronautics, astronautics, astronomy, etc. And in Colombia, for example, we also, in the last couple of years, we have many initiatives. One of them is called CHIA, which is Colombians making research or doing research in astrosciences. There are more than 60 women that only very recently met each other, and now they are promoting the research in astrosciences for much more women to be involved. And from my side also, I'm very much into these actions. So this is a very recent book that I published with a colleague, and this is showing the work done by 20 women scientists, 10 from Colombia and another 10 from different countries in Latin America. So I think this is the sort of actions that can contribute, motivating more women, and especially we have to think about our future scientists, our future women in science. And finally, this is the very last slide. In November, we will have a workshop which is related with astronomy, how to make in astronomy inclusive and accessible, and obviously the gender issues are also part of these sort of discussions. So I invite you to register. It's obviously free, it's going to be virtual. We still have the opportunity to submit contribution for posters until this Friday. So just keep an eye on this, and thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the attention.
Mamta, you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
You may answer well, is we face a lot of constraints from senior researchers when we are going and discussing our case or presenting our results. Somehow, as also Deborah pointed out at one point, it's not given enough importance, and it's taken lightly as a female scientist. So how would you suggest, what can we do to change this kind of mindset which exists and which takes women applicants or researchers lightly? And these are senior professors who are there in the hiring or in the decision committee, and when they are judging it with kind of bias, because that's the way they have been thinking since so many years, and they did not have women applicants so many in front of them, and so they don't manage to take them seriously.
Yeah, that's definitely a very important question. So I will say that the first thing we can do is something like this. I mean, we have to be aware that the problem exists. And obviously, if we don't talk about this problem, it cannot be highlighted and it cannot emerge. So we need to talk about this situation in every single moment that we can, so that everyone knows what the actual problems are, how to face them, and how the situation cannot be the same as it was many decades ago. So I will say that every one of us has the responsibility to spread the word, to talk about these issues, to uncover all issues that somehow, and in some situations, people prefer to cover and not to, put the hand on the wound. So it's our responsibility to highlight and to aware as much as we can of this gender imbalance. And also, I am very positive because of the new generations are very aware of this. So probably in a few years, the situation will be better, obviously, because we have a change in the generational change, and this probably will help a little bit.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any other question from the audience? So there was one question by Holly Andrews. She was asking for the link for the seminar that you're talking about, astronomy as a workshop, Astronomy Beyond the Common Sense. So we have sent it.
Okay, yeah, I will share it to you probably internally or in the chat. So I don't have it here in the slides, unfortunately, but I can share it with you over the chat.
Right. Any further questions? So we have Gloria, who is thanking all the speakers, excellent presentations, and greetings from Argentina. Thank you very much, Gloria. And we are really very sorry. We had circulated the Zoom link last week, but somehow it went into the spam folders, looks like. And Deborah has already pointed it out. And that's the reason why we have very few participants today, though hundreds of them had already registered. So we are going to put all these presentations on our YouTube link, and we are going to send it to you. And we'll also keep it on the webpage. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this session. And we thank the speakers. It was really great. And it was a mix of good wisdom from every side and every career stage and from both the genders. And in the future, we are going to organize our seminar sessions with male and female participants both, so that we get a complete overview and complete understanding of the situation. So thank you, Santiago. Thank you very much, Deborah. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
so
It was a pleasure.
Thanks
I
so
hope
much.
we will meet soon. Yeah.
Hiya.
If anyone wants to add anything, please do so. Otherwise, we will stop our meeting here for today. Right. All right. So thank you very much, everybody. And goodbye, and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
So I'll end it over here, Priya. We have just the last participant.
Seema is a good friend.
All right. Shall I stop it here?
Yeah.
And then we'll collect the recorded talks.